Today's conversation will be with Glenn Lamb of lambiestravels.com and the AussieLambs.com. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Bite of Life podcast. Today I am talking with Glenn Lamb, and he's going to tell us his story, how he came to become nomadic with his wife, Jacqueline, and where he is now, and his adventures throughout this coronavirus pandemic so far. So let's say hello to Glenn. How are you today?
Hey, Kemi, I'm great. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Where are you right now?
We're at a place called Maroochydore in Queensland, which is about an hour north of Brisbane. It's
Oh,
a
wow.
holiday place. A little bit quieter now with all the shutdowns and that, but a very nice place to be to ride out this current scenario that we're all dealing with.
Exactly. If you're going to be locked down, it sounds like an idyllic place to be.
Yeah, well,
So,
we're from Melbourne originally, and we're going to be coming into winter, and winter up here is substantially better than it is down south. So nice, mild, sunny days, and yeah, much more pleasant than the cold and the wind and the rain down south. So we're happy to be here.
oh, sounds wonderful. How many hours is it from you, Brisbane? I mean,
It's about an hour in the car,
okay.
and Brisbane from Melbourne is about 2 hours by plane north.
Oh, wow. It's that far.
Yeah, it's about 2,000 kilometres.
Oh, I see. Oh, wow. That's so I know that things kind of went a little bit off kilter when this whole thing started. But first, before we even get to that, I want to find out more about your nomadic journey. Like, how did you decide that um, the nomadic life was for you?
Oh, well, we'd sort of, we didn't really have a grand plan. Um, we subscribed to a magazine, an American publication called International Living, and it was primarily based at American expats moving to live in Central America, Mexico, etc., for the cheaper cost of living and better weather, etc. Um, and we thought, oh, that sounds interesting. I wonder what options we might have. It's a little bit far away from Australia, where we are, or where we're from.
Hmm.
And so they then actually started creating an Australian issue and started talking about more local issues, and we're pointing to Asia and Southeast Asia as potential places to live at a lower cost of living because we wanted to retire early. Uh,
Yes.
so we decided to take a year off and move to Southeast Asia and try a couple of places to live and just see how we liked it. But just before we did that, this is back in late 2015, we came across house sitting as a possible sort of adjunct to what we were thinking of doing. And so we sort of, stuck our toe in the water as it was with that. And over the course of our year away, we ended up doing maybe 6 months worth of house sitting in Asia
Oh,
and
wow.
through Europe. And
Nice.
we sort of came back after our year away and sort of decided that, well, hey, this experience, meeting people, looking after pets, traveling to different places you wouldn't normally go to as a normal tourist, and living like a
Yeah.
local really appealed
Yeah.
to us. So we just decided then, well, what's stopping us? Nothing. So we then set about the next 6 months. Oh, sorry about that. We set about it's just someone buzzing to come in. Uh,
Sorry about the interruption there. We actually had to stop because, believe it or not, there was a spot check. So, Glenn, please tell us exactly what happened just then.
Okay, so we just had the local police knocking on the apartment door because our son has come up to Queensland where we're staying from Victoria, and part of the requirement for that, the border is closed, is that you have to self quarantine for 2 weeks, and you have to provide an address as to where you're going to be doing that, and then the police may or may not check that you are at that address. And in fact, that's just what has just happened. They've come to check that Brandon, our son, is here, and he is, thankfully.
Oh, wow.
Otherwise, you have to pay a hefty fine if you're not at the address that you state you're going to be at.
That's incredible. I mean, we couldn't have planned it any better. I mean, that's
No, it
live
was
check. So
amazing.
it's something, it shows you that this is really serious business. They're taking it very seriously, and we should too. You should stay at home and do everything that you've been advised to do, whether it's self quarantine. It's a small sacrifice in the whole big
Absolutely.
picture. Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. You were telling us about how you started the nomadic life and how
Yes.
I think you just gotten to the point where you had come back after the year and realized that you could do this.
Yeah, we realised
Yeah,
we could do it. We could do it full time. We tracked our spending and
yeah.
had spent less than we had anticipated, and the house sitting really contributed a lot to that. And so yeah, so we said, well, why not? And interestingly enough, yesterday was the third anniversary of the date when we actually left Australia and started our full time nomadic travels.
Oh wow! Happy anniversary then.
Yeah, thank you.
I, I know that's how we met. You had
Yes,
come to Valencia to sit for us, and we became friends after that. And the next time you dropped by the city, we actually met up. So it's been
yes.
like a great way to actually connect and meet people, people that you might have never met in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yourself and Federico as an example. We've sat for numbers of different people all over the world, and we're really fortunate to call a lot of those people our friends now. And it is a great way to make connections with people, meet people from all sorts of different backgrounds and histories and that, and share experiences. And yeah, it's fantastic. And it was wonderful last year to be able just to pop into Valencia on a cruise and meet up with you guys again and reconnect. It was fantastic.
That is great. And we actually have mutual friends that do the same thing that are nomads that so it's like a small the world is big, but it's like a community of people and the world is also small. You find out one person knows the other person. And so, it makes it easier to put your trust because once you become friends, like if you were to tell me, for instance, like Joe Blow is like a good sitter, I wouldn't even consider not asking them to sit if we needed any like if you couldn't do it you would just be like hey, so the trust is there because you already know the people and you become friends
Yes.
with them, so it makes it easier on all sides to connect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And I mean, and we many times, if we're asked to come back to do a sit and we can't, we will then offer people that we know who may be available to come in and do that, and vice versa. So the actual it's a two-way thing that within the community of house sitting that we're in, besides the homeowners and other sitters, we're able to share sits and recommendations between each other, and that just broadens the experience for everyone as well.
That's fantastic. So I know that you actually decided and loved it enough, and I noticed that you actually upped and sold your place because you were committed to be nomads.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we basically kept we sold everything we owned, but we did keep our home, but we rent that out, so that provides us some income.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, because you do need some money to,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
still get around and flights and food and travel and that sort of thing. So yeah, but we basically have no fixed address. We are sort of itinerant, and interestingly, with this situation that we've come up with COVID-19, it has in fact um, been to our, in inverted commas, detriment, because we don't
Hmm.
have a house to go back to. So we've had to
Yeah.
find other ways to manage that scenario.
When did the coronavirus pandemic really become real to you? Like, I know you had sits planned, and tell us a little bit about when it became real and you realized you had to change plans. I know it's very interesting.
Yeah, well, we had a like a lot of people, we had sits and travel planned for Europe from Australia,
Hmm.
interestingly enough, we had our first ever sit booked for Italy for
Oh.
now, and we're really looking forward to that. But it was probably mid to late February that we confirmed this sit in Italy.
Hmm.
we actually had some sits up here on the Sunshine Coast. That's why we ended up here, for some homeowners who were going to be going, strangely enough, to Italy and to Spain. uh, and it was sort of, um, late February, early March. We were in conversation with them, and they sort of said, this is when Italy was going into shutdown, and they were sort of saying, well, we don't really want to go to Rome if all the tourist places are closed down. So
Exactly.
they were sort of wavering, and then eventually that they told us the expected news. But fortunately, Jacqueline was. I'm pretty optimistic with things, and I was sort of
Mhm.
saying, well, let's just book flights and we'll see how things pan out. But Jacqueline was saying, no,
Mhm.
look, let's just hold off and we'll see how things do pan out. Now, fortunately, even though the airlines had looked after everyone, we hadn't booked a flight, so we didn't have to cancel and get a refund, etc. So it was probably in that sort of early March period that it was sort of becoming pretty obvious that the world was changing. In fact, um, so yeah, so we had that sit. We had travel in Europe up in. We actually have a bike tour along the Danube River for
Mhm.
the end of May into June. That is still in inverted commas going ahead. They're going to make a call on that in a couple of weeks' time. I don't see that going ahead. And then
Yeah.
we had travel, and then we've got house sits in Edinburgh and Spain booked in July and August. But again, I'm hopeful, but it's probably highly unlikely they'll go ahead. So
Yeah.
the more immediate thing when we were here was, well, we were coming to the Sunshine Coast anyway. The flights were booked. We were staying with friends and family for a few days before the sit was going to start. So we immediately started looking at local house sits to backfill the gaps. And we fortunately picked a 1 week sit up and then a 4 week sit down in Brisbane, and we drove down to Brisbane to meet the owners and agree everything. These people were all doing local travel; they weren't going into international.
Mhm.
Uh, but then within Australia, the border between Queensland and New South Wales was getting closed, and that affected one
Yeah.
of those sits. So all of a sudden, the two sits that we thought, oh, that'll get us through at least for 6 weeks, all of
Yeah.
a sudden had just dissipated and dried up.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, one of the good things we were talking earlier about the house sitting community. The homeowners for the 1 week house that we had up here, we arrived and they basically said, look, we've decided we're not going to risk it and go interstate.
Of course.
They said, but we don't want to muck you around. You're welcome to stay with us for the week
Mhm.
duration of what the sit was going to be, which was really generous of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fortunately, their house was sort of a layout that had sort of two living zones, so we weren't in each other's pockets. But they were a lovely couple, very,
Yeah.
very generous, and we were
Yes.
very, very fortunate for the hospitality that they offered. That gave us a little bit of a window, and we then searched around the local area up here at Maroochydore for an apartment to rent
Mhm.
for a couple of months just to start with, and at least have somewhere stable for a period of time.
Exactly. Wow. That sounds like quite an adventure and it must have been a little bit stressful. But the great part about being nomadic is that it sort of forces you to deal with the situations that come up ahead and you can just solve it in a rational manner.
Yeah, I think one of in fact, some friends of ours just wrote an interesting blog post exactly about the characteristics you develop as house sitters, and being nomadic is that you have to be problem solvers, and
Yeah.
this, whilst is inconvenient, it's not like the end of the world for us. We've been
Yeah.
able to adjust and say, well, what are the options? What can we do? What can't we do? What can we control? What can't we control? And move forward on that basis.
Yeah.
So for us, because we between house sits, we have to find accommodation anyway. Usually, it might be for a few
Mhm.
days or a week or something. This was just finding accommodation for a bigger chunk of time. So
Exactly.
we've been able to lean on our resources and lessons we've learned over the last couple of years to make this a much easier transition. The other thing that's sort of quite handy for us too, as sitters, is Jacqueline and I are with each other 24/7, having started this
Exactly.
nomadic life, and so
Right.
for us to be locked down. in the same place, just the two of us, is reasonably normal for us. Whereas for
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah,
people, it's obviously
exactly.
a big deal.
I know it's like people that go off to work and stuff, and all of a sudden couples are like, forced to spend time together, and it's like, okay, it's a big adjustment for people like you, and to some extent, people like me and Federico were used to it, so it's not
Yes.
as big of a deal. But you do learn to, like you say, you have to be a problem solver, and even it balances out. But sometimes Federico panics, and he's more like, "You're like, let's just see how it goes." And I'm just like, "Well, this could happen." So it's kind of like a balance. And sometimes I'm the one worried, and he's the one that says,
Yeah.
"Hey, this is how it is." So it's kind of nice to have that balance. But
Yeah. Absolutely.
now that you think, of course nobody can predict how long this is going to last, but has it made you think, like, maybe we need to like have someplace permanent, or do you think things are going to change pretty soon and the borders will become open and you can go about your life again?
Um, it's really difficult to say. This is like the how long is a piece of string. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still very much an unknown, and for us, I mean, I think our mindset at the moment is we're not expecting anything to change for probably six
Hmm.
months.
Yes.
So we've got this place for 2 months. We will then assess, just before that sort of finishes that period, and work out what we're going to do. We're ostensibly assuming our local borders are closed, staying up here, so that's okay. Um, we will be happy to get back on the road again when it's possible. But
Hmm.
if we have to stay here for an extended period of time, well, that's just how it is, and we can't
Okay.
control that. So we then just have to work out, what are we going to do? We've got other house sitting friends who, in a similar situation to us, who actually have a house that's rented out, and they've unfortunately given notice to the tenant so they can move back into their property. Where that's not on our agenda at the moment in any way.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but we'll just sort of see how things pan out. I mean, fortunately for us, we're in a situation where we can support ourselves during
Hmm.
this sort of difficult period, whereas a lot of house sitters aren't in that, don't have that luxury.
Yeah.
So we've always had a rainy day money sort of scenario, not for this scenario.
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
some other, disaster or emergency, or if something happened to one of us or whatever. So at the moment, we don't know how long it's going to be. Um, I think it's going to be at least a year before things get back to any sort of normal.
Yeah. I'm so
And we'll just take it as it comes.
I'm so glad you mentioned like having, rainy day money saved aside. Like, I don't know if you know about the FIRE movement, which is like the
Mm,
financial independence retire early people. They call
yep.
it the fuck you money, the money that you can the money that you can just, where your boss is like being a dick, you can just tell him fuck you and
Mm,
go because you've got money saved up. But I think it's
yep.
important for everybody to have that sort of stash, like,
Yes.
because you can't predict. I mean, nobody could have predicted that the world was shut down like in a matter
No.
of days. And if you don't have like that cushion, well, you're at the mercy of you
Yeah.
know people. So
Absolutely. I
yeah,
mean, we,
and
we
people
we were
don't
sort of
realize that.
we were sort of really fortunate in not a planned sense, just how things panned out. That when we decided to do our nomadic travels and our year away, we were all set to go, and then we had some medical things we had to attend to, which delayed us by a year.
Hmm.
As it turned out, that was a huge blessing in disguise because
Look at
it
that.
enabled us to save for a year before we
Yes.
started, and so
Yeah.
we are now basically we're always a year ahead with
Ahead.
our money because of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as I say, that turned out to be a blessing in disguise because we've already got our money for 2020,
Right.
available. So that's just given us a huge level of comfort going forward.
And it doesn't force you to make like bad decisions, which is
Yeah,
great because when you don't
or,
have
or
an option,
yeah,
you
or
tend
rash
to.
decisions. I was thinking
Yes.
today how people, the worst thing is to make decisions when you're really emotional or stressed out, which a lot of
Yep.
people obviously will be and are in that position. So it's great to not have to try and make decisions under those sort of circumstances.
Yes, definitely. I know that we're talking, and the cops came to check up on your son. I know he was also on a multi-year journey, is it?
Yes.
That
Yep.
he was traveling all over the world. Now he has an interesting story too, like something happened to him as far as trying to get back to you.
Yeah. Well,
Can
that
you
was
elaborate?
that. That was really interesting because he'd been in Indonesia, traveling around for a while, and then he went to KL, which is obviously a good travel hub.
Hmm.
And then he was looking at options, and he bought a flight to Taiwan because he was going to stay with a friend in Taiwan. Um, just before he was about to depart, Taiwan introduced a quarantine period for people coming in from overseas, but you had to go to a government arranged quarantine, which was going to cost something like $2,100. So
Jeez.
so that immediately went off the radar, and
Yeah,
then we
yeah.
and then we said, well, stay in Malaysia, and you maybe
Hmm.
can go up to Langkawi, nice chilled out place on the beach, just ride it out there. So he was looking to do that. Bought a ticket, and then Malaysia introduced domestic travel restrictions, so only nationals could do that. So he couldn't do that.
Oh my
Um,
god.
he was then looking at another option, and that didn't pan out. So eventually he said, "Okay, we'll come back to Australia." So he booked a flight with AirAsia and arrived at the airport, and they cancelled the flight, and they said, "We'll put you on the next one, which is in the evening." So he stayed at the airport, got to the
Oh my
evening, that
god.
flight was cancelled. They said, "We'll put you on the one the next day." Another 12 hours later,
Oh my
got there.
gosh.
Guess what? Cancelled again.
Canceled
So
again. Yes.
I jumped into gear and said, "This is just all bullshit. What can we do?" So I again went into problem solving mode.
Hmm.
Went online, had a look at the KL International Departures Board, like their airport
Hmm. Hmm.
website, and had a look at what flights were flying.
Yeah.
Found one that was flying into Australia from Adelaide, and just basically this was like 3 hours before it was due to depart, and just booked a ticket and said, "Look,
Yeah.
Brandon, just jump on that plane, get to
Just
Australia."
exactly. Yeah.
So he got back. But the interesting thing with that was he flew into Adelaide, and we're from Melbourne originally. So he
Hmm.
had to self quarantine for 14 days. But the really bizarre thing was that he got into Adelaide, and then they allowed him to fly to Melbourne and then do his quarantine in Melbourne, which was
Oh my
really, really
god.
weird. Uh, so yeah,
I
and
think
now
sometimes
he's
they make it up as they go along as well, right?
yeah, again, I think like all these things, policies and that were evolving, and it's just
Yeah.
find out where he's going to stay. So he did provide the address and at his friend's house, and he stayed there. But then again, strangely enough, he finished his quarantine last Friday, a week ago,
Hmm.
and he was able to get a second-hand car, and because he had nowhere to live, because we don't have
Of
a home,
course.
he doesn't have a home
Uh-huh.
because he was a traveller. He
Uh-huh.
came up here to Queensland, but because the borders were shut,
Mm.
um, they were only making exemptions for certain classes of people to be able to come into the state.
Uh-huh.
Now he didn't satisfy; they were basically emergency people, and you work here, and because it's quite close to the border, there was various categories which he didn't fit. But there was one that basically said if you were moving to Queensland, you can come in. And so basically,
So
he drove up, and we were just hoping that once he got to the border, that the police would let him in because we had an address here that he could come and
yeah.
stay at. And fortunately, they did. And as we saw earlier, they actually checked that in
Yeah.
fact he was here and wasn't telling a little lie. So now
Exactly.
he's here in self isolation or with us for the next 2 weeks, and then he'll be able to get out and about and get some fresh air and exercise
Yeah.
and the like.
I'm sure it's really comforting to you and Jacqueline to have your son home with you. You worry about your kids no matter how old they are, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's 28, and yeah, you're still worried. They're still your little kids. So,
Yeah.
so it is nice that he's actually able to be here and with us, and we know he's safe, and we can keep an eye on him.
How is your lockdown in Australia? Is it as bad as, I mean, here in Spain, we're basically allowed to go out to walk the dog, go to the grocery store, or to the doctor's office, or to the bank, and that's pretty much it. Is it just as intense over there, or is it a little more relaxed?
It's the same but different.
Yeah.
As you probably in Australia, it's a pretty laid back sort of place.
Yes.
And we certainly have different states, even though there's a national approach to everything, the states also have their own rules that they can impose.
Mm-hmm.
Victoria is a lot more locked down than say Queensland, where we are. You
Okay.
you are meant to stay home except for going to the pharmacy, going to the doctors, to your place of work if you're still working, or going for exercise. Um, so obviously all the shops are shut, but then on the flip side of that, there's a big shopping centre near where we are, and a number of the large, stores, retail stores, are still open.
Oh,
They're
wow.
not busy, but they are
Mm-hmm.
still open because the government here has been wanting to try and minimise the economic impact as much as they
Yeah.
can.
Uh-huh.
So shopping centres are open, but only really the big retailers are open. All the
I
small
see.
shops aren't. But I go for a bike ride every morning now, which is great. Get some exercise. We
Mm-hmm.
are able to go for a walk down to the beach and walk along. So as long as you're exercising, you can't just loiter around. You actually have to be doing something,
Doing
because
something.
again, the government here is very conscious of the mental aspect
Yes.
of people being
Yes.
hard locked down. So
Yeah.
they're allowing people to do that. But interestingly enough, today on my walk this afternoon, there's a sign at the beach, which hasn't been there before because it's Easter now, Good Friday. And there's a sign saying you can only be on the beach if you're exercising. You can't just go
Mm.
there to lounge
Yeah.
around
To
or
lounge.
do anything. So it's because it's a warm environment up here, even though it's autumn now, or the fall, as you would say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's You go for a walk in the afternoon, and there are so many people walking on the beach. I mean, people
Yeah.
do keep their
Yeah.
distance, but it's
Yeah.
it's
But
it's it's really, if you compared it to anywhere in Europe at the moment, where they're ghost towns. It's a
yeah,
very different look and feel,
I see.
and that. But we seem to be doing pretty well here at the moment in Australia. The numbers are pretty reasonable, I think, given the stage that we're at here.
Good. Good. It sounds great. And I'm glad that you're able to do that. I can't wait for the day when I can actually get out and exercise. I mean,
Mm,
even though I'm sure the gym is not going to be open anytime soon, but to be able to actually go to the park and just walk. I can say,
yes.
if I'm on the balcony, I can see the Turia from here, and I just, you
Yeah.
just want to go, but it's so close, and you're just like, it's one
Yeah.
thing when you have to stay home. It's another thing when you want to stay home. So
Yes. Yes.
it's really interesting. So
And
very
that
interesting
and
times.
and that Cheerio Park obviously is a wonderful resource that you have in Valencia. So yeah,
Yes.
it's a
I
wonderful
want to
place to
take
walk.
advantage of it, but
Yeah.
soon enough. It could be
No.
worse, I always say.
That's the only way you can look at a lot of this stuff, isn't it? There's
Yes,
there's there's a lot of things you could be looking at and saying, woe is me, woe is me, but we're still standing upright. There's still
exactly.
plenty to be grateful for. So.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's been absolutely incredible and wonderful talking to you, Glenn. I mean, I love the golden points that you mentioned. Be a problem solver. Know that it could be worse, and have some backup money. Those are three things that I think everybody should strive for, especially the last one, because really cash is king, and it can solve a lot of problems. I know they say money can't buy you happiness, but I always say you can buy a yacht and be miserable on the yacht right next to you. so, so there. I'll
That's a
take it
very nice
anyway.
one. Yeah, absolutely. It gives you options. That's the main. It does make you happy,
Yes.
but it gives you options.
Yes, it does. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode. It's been great. And let's hope that things, change for the better pretty soon.
Yeah, I really hope so. Yeah, it's been lovely being able to catch up and chat again, and it's
Yes.
quite interesting having the police at the door in the middle of it. So there's something a little
I
bit
know.
different as well.
It lends a dose of reality to the podcast. So
Yeah,
I like
absolutely.
it. Thanks
No
again,
worries.
Glenn.
All right, Kimmy. No
Take
worries. Take
care.
care. Cheers. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Okay, we'll see you on the next episode of Next Bite of Life podcast. Thank you for joining me today.